professionalism. So, okay. So listen, here we are. And Jen, it is really, really fabulous to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So I start off every episode the same. I clearly know who you are, but there will be people that don't. So imagine you were at a barbecue and somebody said, Jen, what do you do for a living? What's the answer, Jen?
The answer I'd give at a barbecue, I struggle with, actually. But the answer I can share with your listeners, who I imagine are tuned into this kind of stuff. So I co-run, co-chief exec of a business called Board Intelligence, a business that has about 3,000 clients, about 40,000 directors around the world who log into our various software products every week, every month. And our business, as the name would suggest, is about how to help boards to operate at full pelt. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because we have, myself and Pippa Begg, co-chief exec, we have published a book called Collective Intelligence, How to Build a Business That is Smarter Than You. Aha, there we go. You have a copy there. Thank you. I'm here in the capacity today as the author of said book, which sets its sights somewhat broader than the boardroom, sets its sights beyond the boardroom. So it is purposefully not called Board Intelligence. It is titled Collective Intelligence for a reason, exploring how you can help every member of your organisation at every single level to think more and think better.
So let's get a little bit of context before we dive into the book about you as an organisation that would just set the scene for why people would listen to what you have to say, because the world right now is full of gurus, and you can work from your beach doing one day of coaching a week people, and then I come across people like you, Jen, who I know to be credible, but it's not answering the question, why are you credible? But in essence, what is the day job? Expand on that a little bit. Who's paying attention to you, and why do you have I'm going to say the right, maybe the wrong word, but why Absolutely. Are you credible in this space?
And sitting here on a very gloomy January morning, I'm trying to get out of my mind thoughts of sitting on a beach coaching people once a week, which sounds really quite lovely. So as co-chief exec Board Intelligence, it has given the team access to boardrooms around the world, boardrooms of many of the most demanding organizations in the world. And that access in of itself is not widely available. Boardrooms, they are by necessity very separate, very secretive, let's say confidential. And the innermost workings of a board is not something many people get an insight into. And it's I suppose, a quirk of the career paths that myself and my colleagues have taken. We've had this insight into what goes on. And it's given us an opportunity over the past decade or so to also experiment, right, with having understood through working closely with our clients, understood what the challenges in the boardroom are, what the challenges of trying to take really good decisions about really important issues with ambiguous information. The challenges of doing that well, we're very familiar with. And over the last decade and a half, we've had this opportunity to try an awful lot of things to see what works, what makes a difference, and to essentially build our thesis through that journey with our clients, to build that thesis of how do you help a board to take more and better decisions? How do you help a board to operate at full pelt? And it's those insights, that the experience set, that we want to now share with the wider world. Because what we came to realize is that actually many of our most successful clients were the ones whose decision-making center of gravity was as far away from the boardroom as possible. Because we all know, for every decision taken in the boardroom, many, many more decisions are taken outside of it. And in fact, if your most important decisions always have to surface up in the boardroom, these days, you're just not going to be able to move fast enough. So I suppose what gives me the right to be here is that playbook that we have developed through that somewhat privileged access that we've had to boardrooms around the world.
Okay. So that's great, and I think that is relevant because it does set the scene for why I should pay attention. I'm blessed as well to work with executive level, to do exec coaching, to work with senior teams, and I think we're operating in different places and spaces. But I think there's enough of an overlap for my interest here. There's a great, well, I think he's the UK's probably leading keynote speaker, Jamil Quresh. He's a fabulous speaker, and he quotes former Hewlett-Packard CEO Lou Platt, who says, "If HP knew what HP knows, we'd know everything that we need to know."
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I wonder, within that is, I had a sense when I was reading your book about this is, I mean, I very much focus on behaviours and the dynamics of teams, etc., which is, not relevant, but there is something here about knowledge and about the capacity to work with it. And I just would really kind of like that kind of lead into your book as to why is it about collective intelligence and not about, in essence, just being a better board?
Yeah. And I think it goes back to, just briefly touching on like the realization that even those organizations that we had the greatest success with, when we were focused firmly on the confines of the boardroom, even the work that we did that we were most proud of wasn't enough. One of our clients, I remember, a non-exec of a FTSE 100 board, he said to us one day, "I feel like I need a horizontal board agenda for all of my so-called number one priorities." Boards are overwhelmed, boards of large multinationals in particular, right here, they are overwhelmed with the expectations on them and the remit and the work to be done. It is extraordinary. And I suppose just simply the capacity of a board in the world we live in today, where it's not the big that eat the small anymore, it's the fast that eat the slow. So if you operate in an organization where all of the really critical decisions have to very slowly wind their way up to the top of an organization, it's simply too slow. And on top of that, no one group or person, can be everywhere all at once solving every problem, right? If they try to be, they just create this monumental bottleneck. And too much power concentrated in any individual or any one group, in the end, we know that makes you not just corrupt, but stupid, right? As history bears out time and time again. So I think we just became more and more aware of the limitations of focusing the effort to improve quality thinking, quality decision making in the boardroom. That was actually just not enough. And it's helping to create the conditions, not just in the boardroom, but create the conditions at every level of the organisation for everyone to think well and think more and think better. That's how you really unleash the potential of your organisation and really unleash that collective intelligence. One of my clients, actually, I remember we were pitching to Sir John Timpson of the shoe and key repair fame. And he came into our boardroom. This is quite a long time ago, much earlier in our journey. He came into our boardroom one day, and we were thrilled to have this opportunity to pitch to him. And we'd got this nice deck ready, and we were feeling pretty good about it. We'd pitched this deck at the boards of the likes of everyone from Rolls-Royce, Royal Bank of Scotland, all sort of EasyJet, and it'd gone down pretty well. And feeling that this was gonna fly, and the fact that he'd taken the meeting at all boded well. So off we went with our presentation, and he let us get about 5 slides in before he held his hand up like he was trying to stop the oncoming traffic, and he just couldn't take it anymore. He said, "Stop." He said, "I don't need a better board. The important decisions in my organisation are not taken in my boardroom. They are taken as close to the front line as humanly possible." And he introduced us to his methodology that I think others subscribe to as well, but one that he was very proud to have taken into Timpson's, what he called upside down management. And this idea that it is the role of every level of the organisation to support, enable and empower the level below. And that gave us pause for thought in the early days. And then, as I say, we then saw this play out in our clients' boardrooms, that even a board that's really high functioning, really high performing, in itself, it will just create a bottleneck if it tries to take all of the important decisions all of the time. So you've got to look to build the right skills, capability, the right conditions outside of the boardroom to not just create the capabilities that you need, but to build the confidence in the board to let go of some of that control. And you need to know that if you're going to let other parts of the organisation take more decisions, you need to know that authority is going to be well discharged, And for that, you need to have put the right systems, processes in place.
So there's something here about when, and I've got a client at the moment who, phenomenal organisation, and three of them started the business 20 years ago. It's now £1 billion organisation. So, hanging on by the seat of your pants for, a massively success story. But guess what? When there was three of them in a porter cabin, and it grew a little bit, they could control everything, they could know everything, they could be finger on the pulse. And just talking to Simon, one of the partners yesterday, he was, I used to know everybody. Now there are people walking around my organisation and I don't know who they are. So there's something here about, if I'm hearing you correctly, about the capacity of any one board to make all the decisions that really do need to be made really doesn't exist, because it's too much, too fast, and too big.
Yeah.
And there's just almost at the starting point, you intellectually have to accept that that's a truth.
Yeah.
Because all the processes in the world,
if your business
if
is
it's
5
just to
people,
shore up, yeah.
No, indeed, and I think, and I think as it goes beyond that. So part of my motivation is indeed driven by sheer expediency of what works best, and this is what works best. There's another part to it as well, which is just what a waste to employ all of this human capital and then not to tap into it. Just what a waste. And in this day and age, who can afford waste? As long as there are jobs to be done that can only be done by human beings, and that territory may be getting smaller by the minute, not going to lie, right? We all know, we have some fierce competition there from AI. But for as long as there is work that can and should only be done by human beings, tap into it. If you're going to hire a human being, tap into that grey matter, help to build that grey matter, exercise it, and extract the value from it.
So there's something here about this fallacy of the superstar CEO and the one person who is the figurehead and makes all the decisions. That feels very much like a thing of the past. Yeah.
Right. And yet, never have we had it, the media is full of it, right? I mean, we all love what's the latest thing Elon Musk has been up to, what's going on in Bezos land. And, these stories of these larger than life characters dominate the headlines. And I enjoy reading about them as much as the next person. But you referenced the word fallacy, and I think this is the crux of it, because, I suppose the corollary, the opposite of collective intelligence would be go find yourself a superstar CEO and then get out of their way so they can move fast and break things, make all of the important decisions, and everybody else's job is just row behind them and execute. But the truth is that even those characters who appear to be these superstar CEOs taking all of the big calls themselves, when you peel the onion, when you dig below the surface, what you find is going on is something very, very different. At least for those that are enduringly successful, decade after decade, it's not quite as it appears. So if I take some of those examples I was talking about, let's have a look at, Apple is a great one, right? We all know Apple, led by, for many years, Steve Jobs, extraordinary visionary leader. But he did not come up with the iPhone. In fact, it was not his idea to enter the mobile phone market at all. It was colleagues of his who had to drag him kicking and screaming to embrace that idea. Equally, Warren Buffett, another incredible leader, incredible brain, very smart man, no denying that. Their single most successful investment to date was the decision to back Apple, which again was not a decision that he supported, but he empowered one of his lieutenants to take that call. It's turned out extremely well. And then Bezos, right? Again, phenomenal guy, incredible entrepreneur and leader. Amazon wouldn't be Amazon without him. He didn't come up with the idea for Amazon Prime. It was one of many things on their journey that really changed the way we shop. That was an idea of a junior engineer. And I was chatting to Jeff Bezos's former chief of staff, who went on to then work with Eric Schmidt at Google. And she said to me, these larger than life superstar CEOs, unquestionably, they have, incredible vision, incredible confidence, but they've also thought hard to help others to think well. And that is what has made them as successful as they are.
It's that capacity to be free to make decisions because other people have done the hard work of the thinking.
Yeah.
And actually what I'm really doing is selecting from the fruit of intelligent people having done the thinking without fear.
Yeah.
And offering me potentially things to reinforce, but also things to challenge. And I'm free not to necessarily spend my day worrying about the minutiae, because I trust you've done it. And what I'm being offered is something I can rely on, and I can be free to have those more strategic decisions.
Exactly.
And there's a confidence there, isn't there? There's something there about the individual's capacity to... And I always think there's a difference between the team that you get and the team that you've got, which is, when you inherit a team on day one, well, that's the team that you've got, right? But the team that you deserve is the one that a little bit later you've got to own it and go, after a certain amount of time, this really is me, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's about...
And there's something about that forming that.
Yeah, and it's about what do you do to create the conditions to get the very best and the very most from those people. And I suppose that needs to begin with the core belief that the potential is there, that given the right conditions, that the people that you're working with and the people that you may not even be able to see within your organization, you need a certain belief in the potential of your workforce, given the right tools, given the right environment to do good thinking. So, I mean, another, I remember reading about the educator Sal Khan, and he made the point that a few hundred years ago, 400 or 500 years ago, about 15% of the world population could read. And if you'd asked, or polled, what percentage of the world population do people back then believe have the potential, have the mental capacity to read, given the right education and opportunity, then he said, that it would have been about 30%. It was widely considered that maybe 30% of the world population had the mental capacity to be able to read, given all of the opportunities to learn how to. Now, we know that not to be true, right? We all know that, almost everyone, not everyone, but almost everyone, given the right education opportunity, can read. And I think you have to have a similar belief that given the right, that the human potential of your workforce, given the right environment, given the right education, the tools, and the confidence to use them, that they do have this incredible thinking power that's just waiting to be unleashed. And our book sets out how you do that.
So let's get into the book. You talk about the three themes, I think, of collective intelligence, and it would be great to maybe just set the foundational tenets for what that is.
Sure. So I can now hear the coffee machine in the background starting to clean itself. I'm hoping that's not interrupting the podcast. Right.
That's fantastic, isn't it?
Right. Yes. Yeah. Not so smart of me.
Don't worry.
So three
it's
themes.
It's the beauty of real life that pre-COVID we never used to. We'd have to edit it out. Now post-COVID we go, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how to feed coffee machine into our thesis, and I suppose I drink a lot of coffee. I think it's a lot to do with all of our working days. So
there you go.
So collective intelligence. How do you do it? Right. So our playbook is called the question-driven insight principle, and there are three parts to it. It's all about skills and habits that you can build around critical thinking, clear communication, and focus. But like a lot of the so-called answers to problems we face, it's very easy to say, but how do you do that, right? How do you help everybody to do more and better critical thinking? How do you help people to communicate more clearly? And how do you help them to focus on what matters most? If it was just a matter of saying, do it, there wouldn't have been a book to write and there wouldn't be a problem to solve here. It's that this stuff is seemingly hard, right? And the answers are not obvious. And so what we've set out is all of the ways of making this, both easy to do and hard to avoid, or easy to do well and hard to avoid, that we then set out. I'm happy to take you through it.
Please do.
So let's go. Okay, let's start with critical thinking. So this will make somewhat clearer why our playbook is called the question-driven insight principle. Questions are the spark and the fuel of critical thinking, curiosity. Pretty much every major discovery or invention of mankind stems from someone somewhere thinking, spotting a question that nobody else had thought to ask. And thankfully, this is a capability we are born with, right? We are all born questioners. There's research, Harvard research, showing that small children will ask over 100 questions a day, right? But something happens to us through our formal education that beats this out of us. And by the time we reach the workforce, we've all but stopped asking questions. And there's a great emphasis and value in formal education placed on knowing the answers to the questions, not on isolating the question that he's asking. And it's not just knowing the answers to the questions that we place value on in education, it's actually knowing the very specific answer that the examiner has in the back of their booklet. Right? Go find the scope for creativity or imagination in that, right? So we're born questioners, but we have it somewhat beaten out of us. And so what we have developed is ways of weaving questioning back into all sorts of rituals and routines that are already present in an organization to make it habitual, to spend more time thinking, what is the critical question here? Not the answer. There was a great Einstein quote that I love. It's where he says, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I would spend the first 55 minutes isolating the real question, because once I've identified the question, I can solve it in 5 minutes. So I suppose what we're doing is partly helping to remind people of this, that the value of questioning. And then it's looking at, well, how and where and when in one's working routine can you create the space for this? And what we've identified is that there are those rituals that already take place in the working calendar: management reporting, preparing for board meetings, quarterly business reviews, annual planning cycles, investment cases, and getting the green light to fund new projects. These are all pre-existing routines that happen throughout the annual calendar, currently often seen as a time sink, seen as a break on progress. They are perfect opportunities to reframe the way you approach them as the place for deep questioning and critical thinking. And so what we set out is how you do that, how you turn those activities into questioning activities.
And just before we move forward on that, one of the things I notice about boards is that you have people generally who are in charge of vertical work streams, and they have an overarching responsibility for their place and space. They then come together as a inverted commas leadership team.
Yeah.
And there is an element of the majority, in my observation, of that activity being transactional.
Yeah.
We are reporting, or we're doing resource allocation, or whatever it is that we're doing. If I actually look at the amount of time that is spent, what you would class as being leading the business, then often it's a relatively small amount of time. Because if you started to talk about talent, if you started to talk about culture, if you started to talk about what are we going to look like in 3 to 5 years, and of course, definitely, and a lot of the organisations I work for are private equity backed, and they're on a 3-year sprint and whatever it is. And so actually long-term thinking is actually very much curtailed by process and commercial expectations, and just being, guess what, very often we're trying to turn something around. There's been major acquisitions, we got that at a price because we've now got to put it right, so a lot of work's got to go into it. It's like a fixer-upper of buying a new property, whatever it is. So you've got the stuff of life, let's just call it, going on. So intellectually, I very much doubt, it's like saying to somebody, fitness is good, right? And everybody goes, yeah, but I can't find time to go down the gym.
Exactly.
So there's a metaphor, an analogy here, both at the same time, that I'm interested in. What's the stepping stones to, because there's a discipline, I think. There's a discipline involved in going to the gym. There's a discipline involved in intellectually, I understand. And, I may even be personally motivated to do it, but I may not have the habit or the discipline.
Completely.
So how do you make that bridge? Because I don't imagine that many people disagree with the argument.
Yeah.
But the fear of the reality of it is significant, I would imagine.
No, completely. And I think that's the thing. I mean, we can all buy into the idea of, yes, we should spend more time isolating what's the critical question that we should be grappling with, and thinking deeply in response to it. But that's very nice, but very unrealistic. And have you seen my calendar? And that's why we see this almost not quite Trojan horse, but the act of all of these rituals that we already go through that are not adding much value. As I say, that most people think about preparing for board meetings, preparing for quarterly business reviews as a hassle, as an intrusion in their, in trying to get, it's an interruption to their job and getting on with the stuff that they're trying to tick off their to-do list. When you completely change the way those things are done and you create new tools and new rules around how they should be done, suddenly it becomes the most valuable part of your working month, where you work out, what am I even trying to do? Is it even the right thing to do? And how should I be better doing it? And I mean, I know myself, I will sit down to prepare our board meeting materials. I will sit down to write the strategy paper, and I'm very clear what our strategy is. In fact, I've stood up already and I have talked to the whole company about our strategy. I sit down to prepare my paper, and it's not just a process of writing it down. It's a process of writing it down, reading it, and discovering that various bits of it don't make any sense, and identifying the wrinkles, and then ironing out those wrinkles, and then, having done that, having to rewrite it, because by the time I have prepared that paper using the tools and the principles that we advocate, I end up with a different strategy to the one I started with in my head. It is the process and the act of externalizing some of this thinking and writing it down that enables it to stand up to inspection to you yourself. And by adopting these methodologies around questions and answers, identifying first of all, what are the critical questions I'm trying to answer for this strategy, spending time really nailing down those questions, and then really digging deep to source meaningful answers to those questions, going through that mental discipline, to use your word, of doing this, it's not just a communication exercise, it's a thinking exercise. And it's one that I kind of have to do anyway, right? Which is why I think this is such an opportunity, I suppose a golden opportunity and often a missed opportunity, to repurpose, refactor existing activities in the calendar and to turn them into something very valuable, purposeful, useful.
So there's something there about, you're going to be making a certain amount of effort anyway. The reality would be, why don't you do it better?
Yeah.
So it's not about more time, it's about doing it in a better way. So give us an insight then into that element of, what are some of these, if somebody's made the intellectual step and they've gone, Jen, I get it, I'm bought into this, or we as a team, we're with you, but I don't think we don't know what we don't know. We've got new habits that probably need to be created, and there are probably some templates and tools that we need to get used to and familiar with and break in. Jen, start leading us down that path.
Sure. So we recommend what we call QDI plays. So the methodology, question-driven insight, QDI. And a QDI play is a set of questions that are frequently, almost universally valid and valuable. And by starting with a QDI play, a pre-packaged set of good questions, you can start to build this habit of approaching a problem from the perspective of, what are the questions I first what are the questions that need asking, right? And these QDI plays, these sets of questions, are not the beginning or the end of the process. It just gets you going, gets you started. And I suppose one of the other truths that we've learned along the way is that the most powerful questions, most of the time, are the simple ones. And that, complex, clever questions are often a distraction. And often it's the questions like, why, so what, now what? Those are the questions that will often yield the greatest truths, which is why we've been able to package up these sets of questions that can be so universally applicable for people to get started with, encouraging colleagues to work with these initial question sets as the starting point for framing their thinking and getting this questioning habit back. So if I give you some examples, if you're writing a performance report, this is all going to sound incredibly obvious, and that's kind of the point. It is incredibly obvious. It's just not the way we often approach it. What am I trying to achieve? What's gone well? What's not gone well? Why? So what? Now what? Looking to the future, what are the critical risks and opportunities that I see? And net, where does this leave us? What do we need to stop doing, start doing, or do differently? And what's my confidence in achieving those goals I set out at the start? Very easy, right? Very simple, kind of obvious. But very often you will find that a performance report sets out, tons of stuff looking back, nothing looking forwards, tons of information, but no, so what, now what? Loads of information, but not at the end of the day, where does this leave us? So all of these, or it sets out all of the good, but none of the bad. Here's everything that's gone swimmingly well, and and let's not dwell on the tough stuff. But by sharing with your colleagues, here is a set of questions, here's a QDI play that's a really good starter for 10. Engage with these difficult questions, simple to say, hard to answer. Engage with these questions, try and really root out and unearth the real insight in response to each of them. And in the course of it, keep thinking, what questions am I missing? What other important critical questions do I need to raise to truly get to the bottom of what I'm trying to share here?
There's a few things that resonate with me, and tell me how this sits with you, Jen, because I notice that, let's just say I'm working with a team, and I often focus on running meetings, and it has never ceased to amaze me where I can go in with an exec team, and I'm not there to help them run a coherent meeting. I'm there in essence working on team effectiveness, but it comes clear relatively quickly that they can't stay on point. Just something as simple as that. So I have a meeting methodology, how to run a coherent meeting. Now, not going to run through it now.
Oh, I'd quite like to hear it.
Well, we'll do it in due course, but the point is, it is in itself not complex. Now, there is what I think I'm hearing and what you're saying is what I identify in that space, which is there's difference between the intellectual understanding of a thing, the competence of application of a thing, and then the craft of the skill of a thing.
Yep.
And those are 3 levels. Because if I say to any one person, do you know how to run a meeting? They'll go, yeah. I mean, they intellectually know there's a topic and we talk about it. Then there's something about discipline and the repetition of it to understand what I think sports people understand, which is, you and I don't play football, but you're playing football, I'm playing football. The only difference is I do 6 hours of training a day and you play occasionally at the weekend. Now, because I have the discipline and the craft and the dedication, that my skill on the craft is significantly more to yours. So when you say simple questions, that resonates with me, but actually the complexity is in the simplicity of the craft and the seeing it through to the end and not jumping to action rather than actually reflection. So there's something in there that when you say simple,
doesn't mean easy.
But it doesn't mean easy, right? Bingo. Bingo.
No, completely. And doing it, it's beguilingly simple to set out some of the how, and it's surprising, it can be helpful.
That's a lovely phrase. It's beguilingly simple. I love that.
Which is why we overlook it, right? Because I'm a sucker just as much as the next person for things that sound complicated, and that you imbue it with more value for that reason. Whereas, as I say, very often it's asking the question why that we overlook. Like, why are we doing this? That goes on unasked and unanswered. One of the other things I'd say about the discipline is that it's because it is, to your point, hard. Engaging with difficult questions is hard, right? And it's and that's very tempting to not do it for that reason. And so you kind of need to make this stuff cultural and just the way you do things around here. So as I say, on the one hand, it helps by hijacking pre-existing activities, not trying to carve out magic time and not trying to load up new activities into a already overburdened calendar, right? So hijack what's already there, repurpose it, but make it the way you do things around here. And if you partly because it drives compliance, right? You sort of, it becomes, you're at odds with the organization if you don't then apply these principles. But it's also, in some ways, the only way to make it work. And I'll give you a good example. So, I suppose an example of why you can't really do this stuff in pockets and why you need to get everybody engaged. So, Harry Markopoulos, fund manager a few decades back, he was challenged by his boss. Go check out this other hedge fund. It's doing really well and it's making us look bad. I'd like you to go find out a little bit more about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and I want a bit of that. So he did as instructed. He went and checked out this fund that seemed to be punching the lights out. And this fund was run by a man called Bernie Madoff. And he took a look at it and he said, it took me about 4 minutes to figure out this was a fraud. And he said, it took me another 4 hours of mathematical modelling to prove it was a fraud. He wrote up his findings as a memo, 21-page memo. He called it "The World's Biggest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." He sent it to the SEC. Now, critical thinking, tick. Clear communication, tick. Focused on what matters most, tick. He did everything that we would recommend. Did it work? No. Did the SEC respond and take it seriously? No. And which is really inconvenient for me and for us at Board Intelligence and our thesis, right? Because the real world is messy, and these inconvenient stories would appear to fly at odds with it. But what was going on here was strongly held beliefs present at the SEC that even smart people, and let's assume the SEC are not for the dummies, right? Even smart people find it very difficult to let go of strongly held beliefs. It's the term given the phrase in psychology, belief perseverance. It's this innate human quality that we have to not want to let go of strongly held prior beliefs. And if you try to do this in pockets, if you don't create a culture where everyone that you're interacting with has also bought into this idea of question everything, question,
yeah,
then you're going to risk good thinking, well communicated, falling on deaf ears. So making it cultural, making it the way you do things around here is both important for compliance, for making it, for creating that sense of, I better get with this. This is the way that we work here. It's also important for your ability to have impact. Because if you're trying to do this alone, uncovering uncomfortable truths, sharing, difficult insights that really get to the nub of something, but that do cast a fresh light on an old situation. If you try and do that alone, it can be quite difficult to really cut through.
Yeah, I think I really resonate with that. We've had that Sam Bankman.
Fried, yes.
Is it Bankman or Friedman? What's his name?
Yes, SBS. As you know.
Yeah, Bankman. It's just Bankman Fried. Yeah, that's right.
I know, it's hilarious as ever. Driving his name and
why did everybody buy into it when a lot of people were suspicious of it? So there is an element of human greed. There is an element of fear. We've got it with the postal scandal at the moment, which is why have people kept quiet? Well, because actually I'm fearful. I'm scared. It's all very well saying put your hand up, but I'm gonna the repercussions of that are potentially huge. For some it's the fear I'm low down the food chain and what will that mean to me. Others there's a lot of money here potentially if I let this so there's the human dynamic. So there is something here about the intellectualization of this is very important. I talk about trust, accountability, bravery and connection, and this idea of bravery, there's a bravery element here to what you're talking about, which is intellectually you've got to make the first step to agree with the principle, but then you're going to have to be brave enough to be accountable, to start to do the discipline of the pain of shifting your behaviour and going through that threshold, like wearing in a new pair of shoes almost before they become comfortable.
Exactly. And truthfully, it's not going to work if it depends on huge amounts of bravery, because optimistic though I am about human nature, even I would recognise that, in a large multi-thousand person organisation, you can't just hope that you've hired a whole ton of brave people. Right. So you need to normalise it so that it doesn't depend on bravery, and so that actually the opposite becomes true. It's conspicuous not to do it. So if I give you another good example, we because of our heritage in the boardroom, there's a lot of focus on candidness and fear in the boardroom of being blindsided, for which you need management to be really upfront with you about things that aren't going well or risks and challenges on the horizon. Now, we all know that it's human nature to want to look good to the people who determine your future career progression and not to want to air all your dirty laundry and all your mistakes, if you can avoid it, right? Like, we all feel the same. So if you introduce the question that everyone has to answer month in, month out, from your report to the board right the way down to your meeting with your boss, any level, not just the question what's gone really well, but what's not gone well. And you make that normal, that in fact that question is conspicuously absent if you are not answering or posing and answering in your report to the board what's not gone well. Why not? So what? Now what? That makes it a lot easier to be forthcoming about the challenges and risks, because it normalizes it. And in fact, you start to build this understanding that if you can't answer that question, it is not because you're such a superstar leader, there are no problems in your part of the business. It's actually because you don't have a grip on your part of the business. Because business, as with life, is never plain sailing. So if you can't articulate what's not gone well and what you're going to do about it, then it's actually a poor reflection on you not having a proper grip on what's going on in your part of the organization. So make it easy. Don't depend on too much bravery. It does, however, you do build confidence over time. You build confidence at, sharing a point of view in response to these questions, and provided, everyone's on the same page, supporting and encouraging that behavior, then it gets easier, both mentally to do it and, the confidence to do it with.
I think that's really important. The act of bravery to break the chain of behavior doesn't then mean that this only works on us being constantly brave. I like that. We've got to normalize this. Yeah. We may have to have some brave primary actions, but we've got to get to a place where actually this is the way we are around here. So almost if somebody joined in 6 months or 8 months or a year, they would see it as the way it is. So that's, with certain size of businesses, that's a fine thing. When you've got businesses with 10, 15, 20, 30,000 people in them, that's an interesting conversation.
Where it's even more important, right? Because if you are responsible for the behavior of those 30, 40,000 people, then you're going to need some devices that do not depend on you being personally present and scrutinizing everything that's going on, right? There's a quote I heard years ago. It was attributed to Warren Buffett, but I'm not sure if it was him, so I've never quite traced it back to him myself, but it said something like, the only thing I know is that someone somewhere across the Berkshire Hathaway estate is doing something they shouldn't be. It's the only thing you can know. And, when you're dealing with these, you're dealing with such a large population in these very large organizations that you've got a normal distribution curve, right? Of really, really good people and not so good people, and then the people in the middle. You've got to, what can you do from 50,000 feet to create the conditions that skews that curve in the right direction? There's the vast majority of people will be probably somewhere in the middle of that distribution curve. And there's a great quote that I can't completely remember this way. It was Franklin Roosevelt's speech around 1938, where he said something along the lines of, the easy job of government is dealing with bad people. The much harder job of government is dealing with all of the really good people behaving badly. It's not quite what he said, but it was along those lines. If I had a better memory, I'd give it to you verbatim. And it's, what can you do to create the conditions for the good people to behave well? Because for a lot of us in the middle of that bell curve, we are heavily influenced by our environment. And whilst it's very difficult, I don't know, tackling the tails, tackling the really bad people intent on doing bad things, I'm going to put my hands up and say that goes beyond my skill set. But where I have learned an awful lot over the years of working with our clients in the boardroom and helping to drive behaviour through an organisation, it's what can you do about that big, great bulk in the middle to create the probability that they behave in light of their best selves. So there, it's creating a habit and normalizing the idea that you share early, immediately, what's not gone well, what's on your mind, what's keeping you awake at night, creating an open information culture through a device like that. It's actually quite simple, incredibly effective at helping to shine a light on what could otherwise be little dark shadows in an organization that needn't be.
And what are those stepping stones then that say, let's just say we've got 5,000 people in our organisation, whatever that number is, and we've got a distribution curve. We've got people that will embrace this. We've got people that will maybe struggle with it, but then we're going to have that group in the middle who will, to a greater or lesser degree, wait to see what they're being rewarded for and wait to see what they're being punished for. Yeah. And it's easy to put out a document that says, hey, new world order. Yeah. But the reality is I'm going to see how I'm going to be managed on a daily basis. So it doesn't matter what the rhetoric is. I'm going to wait and see, when I have my weekly reviews, what I'm getting a kick up the butt for.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it depends on almost an unwritten contract between both parties that the more candid the communication, the more candid people are in sharing early the bad stuff, the concerning stuff, the more people dare to put an opinion across for how they propose to solve a problem and apply judgment to a situation, to make sense of the situation, not just go, here's a whole dump of information, you figure out what to do with it, but here's my take on what this means, what the so what and the now what is. You need the positive reinforcement loop to reward that behaviour and then encourage repetition, from them and from those observing that. So quite often we start at the top. We'll often start in the boardroom and model these behaviours with the chief exec and the senior execs behaving in that way in the boardroom. But then our point is that is effective, but not enough. It's then how do you take that behaviour out of the boardroom and replicate that at every level. Starting with the boardroom helps an awful lot. When it's understood that this is what the chief exec is reporting to the board, it is then much easier to defend why that is the way that chief exec then expects other people to behave as well. And it is visible. This stuff is, it is through the, I suppose, with that phrase, with great freedom comes great responsibility, right? If you're going to give people the latitude to take more decisions, which is what we advocate for, a more decentralized, federated decision-making model, in return for that, it is a trade. In return for more freedom, it is expected there is more accountability. And by writing down the thinking that leads you to your conclusions, it is auditable. It can be reviewed and challenged, which gives you then confidence that thinking is being done, right? Because you can see it.
And how much of this process for you is hinging on the ability to write well?
So the second of our principles, communication, for this very reason, right? I think communication is called the silent killer for large companies, and we can all imagine why. And again, having spent, well over a decade now reading board papers, even at the very top of multi-billion-dollar organizations, communicating well is a skill that is vanishingly rare, right? And so part of our challenge over the years has been helping how to help execs, managers to communicate more clearly. And what's going wrong in the first place? Why do we find it so hard? And we root this back, again, to education and 5 tenets that we boil down in the book, 5 tenets of how to communicate well that we're taught at school and that are wholly unhelpful in the workplace. And so the trick is to unlearn them. So what we spend a lot of our time doing is helping to train management and execs to unlearn some of the core beliefs they have about how to communicate well in the workplace, and then to replace them with 5 new tenets. I can give an example, simple one. We often, many of us are led to believe that formal matters demand formal writing. Or we would say that write like a human, no matter what you're writing about. Time and time again, there are studies all around the world. In fact, I found a study just recently from a Japanese university. So, this crosses cultures, languages, that shows that where we use simple words and simple language, we come across as smarter. Various studies show that if you give a same passage of text, one that uses lots of long, sophisticated words, one that uses lots of short, simple words, and you ask the recipient to rate how smart they think the author was of those 2 separate reports, they will rate the author as smarter that uses the shorter, clearer, simpler words. But it goes further than that. When we're asked to write something for an audience that may be senior audience about a matter that's considered quite weighty, naturally we want to reflect our respect for the reader, and we find ourselves using these often quite long and convoluted words and sentences. What also happens is we find ourselves often writing in the third person, that sort of quite dehumanized, quite robotic style, and that puts distance between your message and yourself and your reader. So, if I were to say, it is necessary to, or sales targets were missed, passive tense, very much sort of third person. If I flip that around and said we missed our sales targets, first person plural, I'm owning that message. It's a much more human tone of voice, and it displays accountability. So the use of formal language is not necessarily making you sound as smart as you think it does and doing the opposite. It's not just hard to read, which it is, and hard to stay awake through. It's also failing to display accountability for your message. And what your reader is looking for are signs of leadership and accountability. So own your message, whatever your message. Own it, use your voice. And your reader is much more likely to root for you. But again, that goes against a lot of what we're taught at school, right? Even in terms of using your voice, starting a sentence with and, starting a sentence with but. If that is the way, if that communicates your voice, and if that's clearer and more compelling, that's the right way to communicate. Oh, I think you're muted. Or have I muted you?
Do you know what? I was a little bit muted there for a second. So I think that is interesting, because when I started out, I wore a suit. And I wore a suit because I was trying to show my professionalism, and everybody else around me wore a suit. And then I got to a level where I noticed, or somebody actually said to me, do you know, Guy, all the people that have suits report to people that don't wear suits. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I know that's not always the case, but the metaphor was there. But there's something about when you're coming up the hierarchy, what you're trying to do is show your knowledge, show your professionalism, show that you can operate at that level. But then there is something about getting to that level and then recognizing that actually, I mean, though it may still be old school, but actually when you move into that more senior role, you may not be wearing a suit. You may not need to talk in that formalized way, because when you are now in that different tier, actually what we need is just conversation. We just need you being genuinely human. We just need you to own your thoughts. And so the charade or the pretense or the mechanic of, inverted commas, being professional, probably it may have served you to get there to a greater or lesser degree, but it won't serve you when you are there. Is what I seem to be hearing, to a greater or lesser degree.
Yeah, I guess I'd struggle with this idea that it's unprofessional. Because I think, and I know what you mean, though. I do understand your point, but I think I'd say that it is that a display of leadership is inherently professional, but a display of leadership does combine with accountability. And whenever a board member or a manager is reviewing your plan or proposal or report, they are really asking themselves two questions, right? They're asking themselves the question, do I buy into what's being presented here? They're always asking themselves a second question as well, which is, do I buy into the team beneath it? Do I think I've got the right people in place to prosecute this plan, right? That question's always in the air, even if it's not explicit, it's there, it's implicit. In fact, in the boardroom, very much so, because boards, if you think about it, what decisions can boards can say yes or no to stuff, but mainly what the board can do is fire the chief exec, right? It's like probably the single most decisive thing a board can do that's at their discretion and not dependent somewhat on management. So there's always that question in the air, do we have the right people here? And if those people don't use their voice, you can't really get to know them. How do they think? And if they won't use their voice and they don't display judgment or thinking, you start to question whether you have a thinking team beneath this or simply a team surfacing lots of facts. But who's taking the judgment calls here? Do we have a team capable of pulling signal from the noise and taking a judgment call here and then articulating it and owning that judgment call by use of their own voice? So I think it's a highly professional behaviour, but I know what you mean. There can be an informal element to it that could be confused as being somehow less professional, which it's not.
No, I see it as being incredibly professional, but I think there's somebody once said to me, the thing is, humour, for example, if you're confident enough in yourself, then humour is okay. If you can be professional enough to be relaxed, and I think at that senior level, the professionalism isn't in the caricature of professionalism. It is in the ability to you don't need to use the big words. You don't need to necessarily wear a suit. If you want to wear a suit, crack on. That's not the issue. But you don't have to fulfill a caricature. To speak plainly, own your statements, and actually, do you know what? It's when you're challenged, it doesn't mean your career's at an end. It just means I'm offering you where I am, what my thinking is, and you may have to hold ground on that when it's challenged. And I think there are a lot of people that write in a professional, I wouldn't say neutrality, but even when they're offering a perspective, they're offering it on a spectrum, because if people don't agree with them, they can go left or right, as opposed to owning an idea and going, listen, there's many roads we could travel here, but I'm offering you this one.
Exactly.
And I
And
think
that's
that's what he's often missing.
what the reader is looking for.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Bingo. So in terms of, we spoke about critical thinking and clear comms. In terms of focus,
Yeah.
is there more to be said on that, just to bring that
Sure.
to life a little bit?
So I'm sure many people listening will be thinking, well, hang on, if you delegate decision making and you encourage everyone to think more, think better, and communicate that thinking clearly, aren't just going to have people running in 100 different directions and utter chaos? And that is why the third piece there is so important. You need to make sure that all of that great thinking power, all of that energy is being channeled towards a flag on the hill, a shared and common purpose and goal. There was a Roman historian called Vegetius who once said the Romans were poorer, weaker, shorter, and in many ways less intellectually capable than their neighbours. But they conquered the lot of them. How did they do that? They had the ability to get organised. Organisation, alignment, it's a superpower. And this methodology absolutely relies on it, to say for the reasons I just gave, otherwise you end up with chaos. So making sure you have very clear focus and alignment on what that flag on the hill is vital. I mean, many organisations struggle with this, right? What is the flag on the hill? Well, not too sure. It's kind of vaguely in that direction. But, having it really well articulated and understood at every level is essential for this. And then again, like surfacing it. So, and then it's not just about having really clear focus, but also being able to pivot when you need to, right? Because, your focus may be appropriate for a period of time and then the world changes. And again, the history is littered with businesses that had a very clear focus, very valid focus. The world changed, their focus didn't. And those businesses are no longer with us anymore, right? So, Netscape, Nokia, etc., you name it, very successful organizations that failed to pivot at the right time. And so how do you do that? It's hard enough to communicate your focus really clearly and make sure it's understood by tens of thousands of people around your organization, or even in small teams, frankly. It can be really hard. But let alone, how do you pivot? And again, you need to move fast these days. How do you get everyone to stop thinking about what they were thinking about and start thinking about this new thing? You can't lobotomize your organization. How do you engineer that? Somebody once said to me, it's he who asks the questions controls the conversation. So again, it goes back to questions and building a way of working in your organization that involves regularly engaging with sets of critical questions, and then from time to time changing those questions. So we use software for this. We're a software business. So our clients use our product called Lucia, which is their management reporting platform. They log in, or management execs will log into this platform when they come to write their management reports, and they will pull from this system sets of questions and then iterate around them and make them their own, right? But, when you need to change when you need to change the focus, change the questions that everybody engages with month in, month out, and it makes it much more real, right? So, if you help your management team to, if you require that your management team engages with a set of questions when they report each month, each quarter, each year, those questions will start to become their preoccupation. They will start to agitate around a different thing because it's a different thing that's being asked of them each time they come to prepare these reports. One of our clients, EasyJet, working with them for over a decade now. I think it must be just over a decade. But right in the early days of our journey with them, they'd taken on a new chief exec, Carolyn McCall, and she wanted to engineer a pretty major pivot from an organisation that had always been profit first, customers second, people, like employees third. She wanted to pivot that to people, customer, profit. Massive transformation, right? This is an organisation where you had to take your own stationery. If you're an employee of EasyJet, back in the day, you had to take your own stationery into the organisation. And she wanted to pivot this culture from where actually the workforce was number one. She believed that if you could help make sure that everybody felt valued, appreciated, and grew, that would translate into greater customer satisfaction, which would translate into better profits that take care of herself. So it's a pretty major pivot that she wanted to engineer. She took over at a really tough time for the organisation, oil spiking at over 100. There was the dust cloud covering Europe and planes were grounded. There was, as there probably always is, there was a lot of industrial action taking place all over Europe. And what had been the stronghold of EasyJet, the low-cost carrier, suddenly the genie was out the bottle and everyone was playing that game, and they'd lost their unique selling point, wasn't so unique anymore. So this was a really tough time. The headwinds were pretty epic. And she wanted to engineer, in the context of all this, a massive pivot. And she did it. And she pulled it off, and it was extraordinarily successful. And EasyJet was she created over 50% value during her tenure, and absolutely pulled off a turnaround. One of the things we did was made sure that every time anyone in that organization sat down to think about performance, the number one question on their mind was, what have I done to help the people in my team feel valued and developed? And putting questions around the people front and center of everything they did at every level became really important. So developing dashboards, data dashboards, where the first question that the data dashboard would answer would be questions around people engagement and satisfaction, and that helped to drive that change. So she had a very clear change of direction, change of focus, but she followed through by helping management pivot their attention through this similar device.
I know. I've just a little bit of interference. So I've just been turning the microphone off, so I don't know where it's coming from. So there we go. So I'm alert to time, and I recognise I say this to everybody that I have on. You know, with a bottle of wine and a Chinese takeaway, I could spend the whole weekend having a conversation with you. So the book that you have is called Collective Intelligence. I'm just holding it up, and it's how to build a business that's smarter than you. And I think that's the bit, isn't it? That how to make the business smarter than you are. I love that. It's available on Amazon, I presume, and
it is indeed.
Other places.
Yep, it's available on Amazon, Smiths, all the usual major booksellers. The title of the book, we had a bit of help from our colleagues with that. We put it out to the team to help us come up with the title, and we should probably be a bit offended that was the title of the book that they thought we were qualified to write. But yes, indeed. Do go buy a copy.
As an organisation, if I wanted to check you out as an organisation, where would I go to, Jen?
www.boardintelligence.com.
Okay, fabulous. So listen, you've been an absolute rock star. Thank you for taking me through. You know, I think with all of these things, it's enough to interest people. It's enough for people to have a sense of you and to have a look. You've really done a lovely guided tour. I'll bring us to an end. I'm going to get you to stay on just for a little bit longer, just to make sure that everything uploads. But from me and everybody that's listening in, thank you so much for giving me the time.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you.